All right, good evening, everybody. We are going to get started. My name is Ellen Kennedy. I'm the Education and Visitor Experience Director here at the National Museum of the Great Lakes. This is the final of our spring series and our annual lecture series. These are hybrid, so I do have a few kind of housekeeping things for the people on Zoom as we go, which don't pertain to the people in the room. And we'll have some things for people in the room that don't pertain to people on Zoom as well, and vice versa. Thank you again for coming out and signing up. Please don't forget you can still give at nmgl.org/donate. If you need closed captioning on Zoom, you can turn them on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. If you have any issues with the Zoom portion, log out and log back in again. That usually seems to fix any issues. If anything were to happen to your feed tonight, we are recording, so we are hoping to be able to post this in the next few days on our YouTube channel, so you'd be able to watch it later as well. And we'll send out a link to all of the registered participants later on. We did, as a reminder, have some, or as another apology, we had some issues with our audio on our Zoom for the last lecture. We were not able to recover the audio quality to post the video, but we did find a recording of the presenter from another program of the same lecture that he gave at another location. We're going to share with everybody actually in the email from this evening as well. And then every year we have our annual meeting to give an update on the organization and also elect officers of our board. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Christopher Gilchrist, who will go over that with you.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
My role here is very short, and that's thankfully to having an incredibly skilled staff. I don't know what Zoom is, but I appear on it from time to time, and I just stand there and talk. And because Ellen and Kate and a whole bunch of other people make that all possible. So kudos to them. We're going to begin with, well, we have two purposes. One, a quick organizational update on the past year, and then to elect members to the board, which is a statutory requirement of our bylaws. So we're going to do the update first, and then we'll do the quick election of board members. So the pandemic is over, thankfully. Our attendance is reestablishing itself. We are back to roughly 2019 levels before the pandemic, which is fabulous because earned revenue is so important to the organization. Our in-person programming is dramatically increasing because one, people wanted to be back in person. Last year, we gave over 100 presentations across many of the Great Lakes states, but as far away as College Station, Texas. So we are doing programming like this all around the Great Lakes in terms of in-person lectures and experiences. We're continuing the virtual as we are tonight, because that's a great way to reach members who can't make it down here to Toledo. I'd remind everybody that a huge percentage of our membership, over about 60% of our membership, is outside of the Toledo metropolitan area, and they can now experience these kind of events through virtual programming. Carrie, who's head of our research arm, is getting back out on the water. She will be doing about 5 weeks on Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and Lake Huron, doing underwater archaeological research, because now you can stick a whole bunch of divers who are in close quarters on a boat for 12 hours and not worry so much. So good, once again, good things happening. Community partnerships, as you can see, on the property adjacent to us, the Toledo Lucas County Metro Parks is in their final stage of stage 2 of the Glass City Metro Park, which is going to be fabulous for us in the long run. As more people are come down to the east bank of the Maumee River, we will then see a residual benefit from that, that we hope to have be really significant in terms of earned revenue, but general exposure. So a lot of good things are going on in the last year as this pandemic has wind down. The challenges remain. Cost of maintaining. We've got 2 museum vessels that are both over 100 years old. They cost money to maintain. And although we have very generous people and foundations that support us, never a day goes by where I don't think about, oh my God, how am I going to pay for this? How am I going to pay for that? Projects happen, things come up, work has to be done. Or for example, last year we had last fall, early winter, drop in the water levels, which caused the gangway to the Tug Ohio to land on a bollard and destroy that. And now we have to raise money for a new gangway for the Tug Ohio. These things happen. It's part of operating two museum ships. And so we're always on the lookout for new ways to raise money. The cost of improving, if an organization isn't improving, it's dying. And so we are constantly looking for ways to improve how we preserve Great Lakes history and how we disseminate it. And so there's cost to that. And so that is the great challenge of not-for-profit cultural institutions in the 21st century is finding ways to improve and delivering on our mission for the benefit of all. And so these things continue. We have, as you may have heard, looked at expanding our facility. This is an initial artist's conception of a wing that would be along here connecting the pilot house to the building, along with more permanent exhibit space, a very important dedicated traveling and temporary exhibit space, education space, dedicated education space, more office space. Our architects looked at this and put forward this idea and we took it back and said, all right, let's digest it and really look at what we're doing. And we've come back to them with, oh, that's not as hopefully as clear. It's up there. We need more office space than we thought we would need, because if we're going to grow over the next decade, we might as well build it now. More functional space. So we're taking all their information that they gave to us and now we're refining it. So we're in that process. We hope to have important announcements in the next 90 to 120 days about where we are in the effort to make this happen. Ultimately, our goal is to make this happen, have a new wing on the building in the spring of 2025, which is 2 years away. So we're moving forward, and we look forward to being able to serve you better through this expansion project. Thank you for your continued support. That is my brief, less than 3-minute overview, which then leads me to the required activity, which is the election of new board members to the organization. Quick note on how we bring new board members on. Names are recommended to the governance committee of the board of directors, who then take and meet with those people. They are given all of our kind of foundational documents, bylaws, audited financial statements, so they can make a decision whether or not they want to join our team. They're interviewed, they're sought out for particular reasons in terms of the assets that they may bring to the table. And then of course we elect people on a 3-year terms for 3 different terms. So we have current board members who are seeking re-election, as well as new individuals who will be brought on for the board the first time. So for the first time, Sean Harold. Sean is with Fifth Third Bank and is in the client development process. Great energy, wonderful person that we're very excited about having new ideas, a younger person, which is always important. Ann McCauley is CEO over at the Trust Family Offices, a major investment firm here in Toledo. Paul Lamar, you have heard of him before. He had to go off for 1 year because you're limited to 3-3-year terms. He is now coming back on the board after 1 year being off. Karen, and then the rest of these are people who have been voted on before. Karen Fraker, Keith Massarant, J.R. Tolan, Holly Bristol, Jim Hartung, Dennis Johnson, and moving to emeritus status, which means they no longer have voting power on the board, but they can attend board meetings. Jim Garish from Vermillion, Ohio, one of our legacy board members, and Joe Zerby, former managing individual at the Toledo Blade. So if I can have a motion to elect this slate as made, make that motion in a second. Here. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. The results are also online for members who are virtual. So Ellen has a poll going. Those people will vote over the course of the next hour, and at the end we'll announce the success of those elections. That is it for my responsibility. I'm going to bring Ellen back in order to introduce our speaker, get to the real meat of what we are here for tonight. And thank you all for coming once again. We appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you this summer. This is going to be a great year, and we look forward to seeing you down here multiple times over the course of the summer. All right. Thank you so much. The announcement has been made. We have fulfilled our statutory responsibility.
All right, thank you, everybody. As Chris just announced off to the side here, so I'm not sure if everybody heard on Zoom. The board slate was approved. I did end the poll for everybody on Zoom. So now to move on. Give me just a second for some logistics here. So now to move on to the meat of our program tonight. We will get started with the lecture. If you're on Zoom, as usual, if you have questions, you can put them into the Q&A and then I will ask them of the speaker at the end of the program. Everybody in the room will be able to ask in person, obviously. So the Great Lakes have suffered greatly from human use and abuse since the advent of the commercial fur trade in the late 1600s. But progress is being made, and at the helm are local champions, people with a profound love of the region, who led by example and build broad, diverse coalitions in order to realize a common vision. Tonight, we explore the history and stories of inspiring individuals working to make the Great Lakes watershed a cleaner, better place to live. So John Hartig, our speaker, is a visiting scholar at the University of Windsor's Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research, and also serves on the board of directors of the Detroit Riverfront Conservatory. He asked me to keep his bio brief, so I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to switch to his program really quickly for everybody. All right, thank you, John.
Thanks very much. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out on a beautiful spring day, and it's great to be down here in Toledo to share a story with you. Everyone knows it's Earth Week, right? I hope everyone knows it's Earth Week. We celebrated for a week now, but I thought I'd start off with an archival photo. This was April 22nd, 1970. So you see two boats in the middle. That's the Detroit River. In the background, you sort of see the skyline of Detroit, and you can see the edge there of what used to be the Visitors and Convention Bureau, Cobo Hall, and it's now, Huntington Place, but in the foreground is a nice lineman there, and it has an American flag on it, right? The one behind it has a Canadian flag on it, and this is the UAW and the CAW, the Canadian Auto Workers, in the middle of the Detroit River. They placed a wreath in the river. It's a wake on the very first Earth Day. So that was what, 53 years ago, this Saturday, right? They put this on, and think of auto workers on both sides of the border, how they work long hours, 8 and 10 hour days, sometimes 6 days a week. And you think they'd want to come home and it's okay. So they work long hours, 6 and 8 and 10 hour days, 6 days a week. And you'd think they'd come home and want to watch TV a lot. Well, many of them didn't want to watch TV, and they wanted to be outdoors because they were indoors in factories for so long. So they started sportsmen's clubs and fishing clubs and hunting clubs, and they were at the forefront advocating for clean water. They were one of the first organizations to do that. And so here they're doing it and having a wake on it. This got national media attention 53 years ago, and as part of our history. So happy Earth Day. So let me see here.
Okay.
So great. Let's just try this out once. Left-hand side. Great. Well, we all know how spectacular the Great Lakes are. 1/5 the standing freshwater on the Earth's surface. I always love these satellite shots of the Great Lakes, and they're just so inspirational to everyone. But back in 1909, there were issues with, think of the early 1900s and building the Great Lake, the St. Lawrence Seaway, right? Back then they had to start dynamiting the limestone in the Detroit River to deepen it so that the ships could get through. There were also some significant water quality problems. Many big cities were discharging their waste in the very same place they were drawing their drinking water. So there were typhoid fever and winter cholera epidemics where 2,000 people were dying every winter from this. So the United States and Canada came together and they created this Boundary Waters Treaty, and it provides the principles and mechanisms for preventing and resolving disputes between the two countries. And it's water from the Atlantic to the Pacific, but obviously a emphasis on the Great Lakes. One of the things is it says, one of the clauses in there says, water shall not be polluted on either side of the boundary to the injury of health or property on the other side. What a statement for 1909, you know. So because of that, it's often described as the first environmental agreement. And it created this International Joint Commission. So the International Joint Commission, or the IJC, is made up of 3 people appointed by the President of the United States and 3 appointed by the Prime Minister of Canada to serve in their personal and professional capacities, not represent where they come from, but to speak in one voice to resolve these water quantity and water quality problems that they were facing. So they also then have lots of boards and commissions underneath them, and they get experts to help them out. So they bring in experts, again, to serve in their personal professional capacities to undertake independent fact-finding and provide independent advice for resolving these problems, whether they're water quantity or water quality. So pretty amazing. It's respected throughout the world as a model for transboundary management of a water resource. The Great Lakes are so unique, are so special, 1/5 the standing fresh water on the Earth's surface, that back in 1972, they signed a Great Lakes water quality agreement. So like a blueprint for preventing and resolving problems of the Great Lakes. So that was initially signed in 1972. It was updated in 1978, 87, and most recently in 2012. Because of this, how it's updated, we learn things all the time. Because we learn new things, we want to take that new knowledge and update the agreement. So it's often described as an evolving instrument for ecosystem-based management. And again, it's heralded throughout the world as a model for transboundary environmental protection and restoration. One of the boards under this IJC is called the Great Lakes Water Quality Board. Historically, it's been made up of the senior water program managers of the 8 Great Lakes states, the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, and the federal governments. So, for example, the director of Ohio EPA would serve on this board. So since 1972, they've reported on the health and the status of the Great Lakes. And they were charged to do that through the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And initially they made progress because most of these water program managers managed programs like the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program under the Clean Water Act for municipalities and industries. So controlling pollution from point sources. But in 1985, they said progress in cleaning up the Great Lakes, and most significantly, these most polluted areas of Great Lakes had stalled. And they recommended doing something different. They said, instead of having us tell people how to solve these problems, let's build it from the bottom up. Let's work on a watershed basis, and let's get them to work with stakeholders to try to solve these problems. And out of that, they identified 42 areas of the Great Lakes. Obviously, the Maumee is one of them, but you can see they're on all of the Great Lakes. These are pollution hotspots, Great Lakes areas of concern. You know, they all have their lingo, but this is an AOC or a Great Lakes area of concern. But having that under the auspices of the boundary water treaty as part of this Canada-US Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement gave laser-like focus to clean up of these most polluted areas. And it gave it legitimacy because it was part of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. So an area of concern had a built-in audience of stakeholders ready, willing, and able to roll up their sleeves and make a difference in cleaning up the place they called home. But they needed a leader, a champion. Most of them started out not knowing they were going to become a champion or a leader, but they did. And so they had to develop a plan, and they recommended, they call it this, a remedial action plan. And these remedial action plans adopted an ecosystem approach. And there was fancy language that says account for the interrelationships among air, water, land, and all living things, including you and me, because we're part of the ecosystem. We're not separate from it, and involve all of the key user groups in comprehensive management of the air, resolve the problems. So think of an ecosystem approach as where you bring all the stakeholders together and you have this vision for what you want and measurable goals. And then you co-produce knowledge together. You work together to co-produce knowledge necessary and then co-innovate solutions to resolve these problems. That's the ecosystem approach. The difference between environment and ecosystem is like the difference between house and home. House is over there, it's across the street. It's external and detached from us. But home is something you think you're in. You're in it, even though you're not there. When you talk about it as if you were part of that. So that's an important concept, is that we are part of the ecosystem. What we do to the ecosystem, we do to ourselves. So this is kind of a shift from top-down command and control of pollution from industries and municipalities, to bottom-up collaborative decision-making to try to resolve these use impairments that are in these areas of concern. This was, at the time, a paradigm shift, a significant change in thinking that results in a completely changed view or outlook. So, like waiting in the wings were these people who loved their watershed in the Great Lakes and were willing to work tirelessly to pass them on as a gift to future generations. So I'm going to tell a couple stories about them. One is from Buffalo, New York. We all know Buffalo on the eastern end of Lake Erie there. It wasn't a very big river, but it was an early fur trading post. It was the terminus of the Erie Canal, and it helped open the interior of the continent. It provided safe and reliable passage for vast numbers of people and goods. It was also a very early shipbuilding port. It was the grain storage capital of the world and the leading miller of grains in the mid-1800s. At the peak of the maritime era in the 1800s, Buffalo was the fourth largest port in the world. So as a result of that, it got the name of Queen City of the Lakes. This was one of the early photographs. But by the 1950s and 60s, both industrial and municipal effluents were literally overwhelming the river. There's a picture on the right-hand side of a gentleman on the banks of the Buffalo River looking at it, and you see the oil soaked into the side of the river there, and you see oil floating on the surface of it. The Federal Water Pollution Control Administration, which is the predecessor of US EPA, had this to say in 1968: the Buffalo River is a repulsive holding basin for industrial and municipal wastes. It is devoid of oxygen and almost sterile. Oils, phenols are present in large amounts. Buffalo River, before the Cuyahoga caught on fire, On January 24th, 1968, train went by, a spark came off and didn't catch the river on fire, obviously, right? But it caught the floating wooden debris that was soaked in oil and the oil on fire. There was a gentleman back then who lived in Buffalo, and he was a jeweler. And so that's how he made his living, but he just loved Lake Erie and the Buffalo River. And he spent all of his time thinking about it and advocating for making it cleaner. So this is a picture. Everyone knows who's in the middle of that picture, right? President Lyndon Johnson. Yeah, see on his, let's see, left shoulder's Lady Bird there, right? You can then see to the left of her, Nelson Rockefeller, you can see some of the names in there. The fourth person from the left, the man with the horn-rimmed glasses, is Stanley Spiesiak. So here's a jeweler from Buffalo, just an average guy, and he gets the president to come to Buffalo, New York. He gets the first lady, he gets the governor to come in. He puts them on a barge, a tug, and takes them out to the mouth of the Buffalo River. Tug stops, puts a line down with a galvanized steel pail on the end of it, dumps it into the Buffalo River, pulls it up, puts it down on the bottom, takes a wooden spoon, dips the wooden spoon into the water, right? Pulls it out, and what is dripping off of it? Oil, right? Oil. And amazing. And Stanley Spiesiak looks at the president and says, Mr. President, what's your policy on this? And of course, he didn't have an answer. He's got handlers around him. He says, I don't know what we do with it. He said, well, I'll tell you what we do with it. You put this oil, these sediments, this water into a barge. You go a few miles offshore, you open the bottom of the barge and you let it go. It's the same general area where we draw our drinking water. And he says, how can that be? How can that be our policy? So he goes back, President Johnson goes back, and he signs an executive order banning the open water disposal of contaminated sediment from the Great Lakes. That was the start of CDF's, confined disposal facilities. That started in Buffalo, but an amazing story. A jeweler did that. Here he is on a boat, and you see Bobby Kennedy there, so he spoke out loudly. I'm always amazed that he could have such influence to get these kinds of people to come to Buffalo. And but this is and as a result of all of this, he is credited with starting the Industrial Pollution Control Program in New York because of this. Well, his grandniece this is Stanley Spiesiak. His grandniece is Jill Spiesiak Jedlicka, and she is the executive director of the Buffalo Niagara Riverkeeper, Waterkeeper. And this is what she said: through my work and the work of the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, we honor my Uncle Stanley's legacy through our own mission and vision of clean and healthy waters in Western New York. Pretty amazing. You may have heard of this Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is a massive source of funding. They've had it down on the Gulf of Mexico, so that was their turn to get a bunch of money to clean up those waters. They've had it out in Puget Sound and the Chesapeake. Well, it's our turn now. It's the Great Lakes turn. And so you can get that money, but you need to get organized and line up all the stakeholders. And this Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper were the first ones to get a non-governmental organization to get money to clean up contaminated sediments and habitat. So she broke ground on this. So they were a cost share partner, a facilitator, and a community advocate for $100 million cleanup and restoration of the Buffalo River. Again, the first nonprofit organization in the Great Lakes to do this, and it became a model for many others to follow. So in 1968, when the Buffalo River caught on fire, there were no fish in the lower river. They had fishery biologists going out there every year for several decades and never found a fish. There was no oxygen in the Buffalo River. It's not a very big river. It's pretty small in certain places. Today, you can find 25 to 30 species of fish, a substantially improved invertebrate community that lives in the bottom of the sediments, and peregrine falcons reproducing for the first time in over 30 years. So the good news is that the cleanup, a cleaner river, led to people asking, why can't we have more public access to the river? They started clamoring for that. And then public access led to economic revitalization. Between 2012 and 2018, $259 million of waterfront redevelopment occurred along the banks of the Buffalo River. And this is a pair of twin shots. This is 2014, right? So 9 years ago, and more recently on the right-hand side of the screen here, what it looks like. And it's a vibrant place, much like Cleveland and other places, and what the Maumias in Toledo has as well. But what a great example. So cleaning up these waterways leads to reconnecting people to water through greenways and water trails, and then that can lead to this waterfront economic redevelopment with considerable economic benefits. Here's another quote from Jill Spiesiak-Jedlicka. If the community has the courage to lead, the leaders will follow. You don't have to be a professional environmentalist to improve the environment. We as water advocates do not champion our cause simply because it is our job or someone else has asked us to do it, but because we are driven by our own inspirations, our own stories, our love of community. Find your inspiration, tell your story, make positive change in your community. That's the first one. The second one I'd like to tell you is about the River Raisin, just up, western basin of Lake Erie in Monroe, Michigan. And this is Dick Micka, Richard Micka, and this is him as a young boy. His father owned a butcher shop. He was a young lad who worked first outside there, but worked in the butcher shop cleaning pots and pans. And one day he came out and he was with his father, and he noticed that the sky had turned black. And what could that be? Had a major storm come over? No, it was a waterfowl migration, and it literally turned the sky gray to black. And that had a profound impact on him. How could that be? And he had this great love of the outdoors. Because of that, became an outdoorsman and a conservationist and an environmentalist. He loved hunting and fishing, and these life-changing experiences led him to become a conservationist environmentalist. This is a picture of Point Mouillet. And on the left-hand side is 1964, and they had some high waters back then, and there were some barrier, like small islands, that were protecting the marsh, from erosion because of the waves, and because of high waters, they were eroded, and the marsh became flooded, and it lost a lot of its value. But as going back, remember I said they banned the open water disposal of contaminated sediments in the Great Lakes? Well, now you have to put them in these things called confined disposal facilities. So here, they took sediments from the Rouge and Detroit River, and they had a series of cells in a banana dike. So a massive dike lined, and portions of it get capped to take these sediments that can't be open water disposed. But this also then protects the marshland from erosion, from waves and everything else. So that was the solution to this problem. This is no small task back in the 70s and 80s to do that. And so it was a $45 $5.5 million project from 1976 to 1981. Again, the dikes serve as wave barrier to reestablish the marsh. It was one of the world's largest marsh restoration projects at that time. And, you know, Ducks Unlimited has looked throughout the United States and Canada and identified the top 10 urban waterfowl hunting areas in the United States. And this area is one of them because of it. And for his work in leading that effort, Dick Mitka was honored with Conservationist of the Year by the Michigan United Conservation Clubs. Quite an honor for doing that. But Dick wasn't done by any stretch of the imagination. This river raisin cleanup plan came online, and he was the first one to volunteer to be part of it. And over the past little over 30 years, nearly $100 million leveraged for cleanup and restoration, 43 million on contaminated sediment remediation alone. So they had paper mills, they had a foundry, they had a Ford Motor Company plant. And so all of that had to be, that legacy pollution had to be cleaned up. And now, of course, we have bald eagles that have returned after many decades of absence. And now there's a fish ladder to get up, and many long absent fish have returned as well. So, but this cleanup of the river is, again, a transformational moment. The cleanup of the river makes people rethink their relationship to it. So they want to increase public access to it as a first step. And then for Monroe, they are the home of the Battle of 1812. And so the cleanup of the river became an integral part of this revitalization strategy for Monroe. So they wanted to be seen not only as no longer be seen as a Rust Belt city with a polluted river, but a home of a clean river, a new national park, the River Raisin National Battlefield Park, an international wildlife refuge, the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, and a state park, all within the city limits. And so now, again, as part of this reconnecting people to water and reconnecting neighborhoods to one another and downtown to the community college, they put in this Monroe area loop trail that's fully funded now. They just got a $1.53 million grant from the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation to help build this 6.5-mile trail, total cost of about $4.8 million. But again, connecting people to the River Raisin National Battlefield Park, to Sterling State Park on Lake Erie, to units of the refuge, to neighborhoods, the community college out on the western half of the city as well. An amazing opportunity there. So Dick and his wife Jeannie are also historians, and they love history and were part of the reason there is a River Raisin National Battlefield Park. So they championed this integrated approach to protecting the environment, celebrating history, enhancing the community, and furthering the economy. And you can see the picture of them there. And here's a picture of one of the signs for the River Raisin National Battlefield Park. And they now have a visitor center, and in it is a complete longhouse from the Wyandot of Androdon Nation. And you can imagine how now, just for the Battlefield Park alone, you know, attendance has gone up from 36,000 to over 300,000 in 2021, and even more in recent times. And the local economic impact of that alone is $32 million. And then in addition to that, they have a statewide economic impact of about $22 million. So reconnecting people then leads to economic benefits as well. What an amazing story of ecological revival and community revitalization. Dick's advice to people is provide compelling outdoor experiences for children at an early age and create programs and places that give compelling outdoor experiences that inspire a sense of wonder in children. What wonderful advice that we need to do. We need to teach and we need to show. And Dick and his wife Jeannie are here over here tonight. So you'll get to talk to them a little bit later as a champion. So thank you, Dick and Jeannie, for all you do. But these are just 2 stories in Great Lakes Champions, and there are 14 in the book. There are other ones as well, but these are really compelling stories. Other champions include a land use planner, a drain commissioner, no less, a head of an environmental justice organization, several environmentalists, and more. If you look across these 14 champions, there are some common traits that make them a champion. They have passion for the Great Lakes and their restoration. They're big dreamers with a compelling vision. They're collaborative. They have to be good team players. They have an eagerness to learn and share knowledge with others. They don't want to keep the knowledge inside them. They're willing to tell stories all the time. They're practical problem solvers, know how to overcome obstacles. They're action-oriented and adaptable. They have been in it for the long haul. All of them have been in it for 30+ years. They have honesty and integrity, and they understand the importance of celebrating successes and giving credit. They are generous servant leaders. This is one of my favorite quotes that relates to the book. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. That was Margaret Mead. That is the story of Great Lakes Champions. I hope that inspires you to be a champion in your local watershed and do something in the place you call home. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer some questions.
Hey, John. After all that we saw here, the things that you told about me, we've got one better yet. On top of all of that, we've got Paul Lamar. And so he's in Monroe. He's our port director now. And he's got 1,000-foot long ships coming in the River Raisin. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. For those of you online, Dick Micka, one of the champions, just stood up and says, we have another one, Paul Lamar, who heads up the port in Monroe, and he's one of the champions locally as well. Thanks for sharing that. John, your board of directors. Very good. Yeah. Yes.
You may know a little bit about the situation that we have here with harmful algae blooms. The Maumee River watershed is about 8,000 square miles. It's the biggest watershed in all of the Great Lakes. Terrific farmland, at least it was, and now it's farmland that is saturated with phosphorus. Part of the problem is that we have an inundation of huge dairy and hog farms, and that the manure from those massive farms is sprayed onto the land, and that gets washed off and drained out into the creeks and the streams, and eventually Maumee River and into our lake, and hence the cause of our harmful algae blooms. It seems to be an almost intractable problem. There's no support on the state level for any real action to control the spraying of manure and the continuous phosphorus saturation of the land and then the water. No matter how hard the heroes in our area try to change that situation, the forces that be, the state leaders, our local leaders, don't seem to have the will to resolve that. What's your thought? What might change this harmful algae bloom result that we have?
Yeah. So for those of people who are online, I'm supposed to repeat the question. That was a long other one. Harmful algal blooms, and what can we do to address that now? And we have spent over 100 years moving as much water off the land as fast as possible. Okay, and that's contributed, tile fields, drains, tiles, and moving water off. We need to slow that water down, and we need to have, like 2-stage drainage ditches, and we need pocket wetlands, and we need to incentivize that to make a difference. And we're going to have to start out with some demonstration areas on certain creeks and everything else, but that's an important thing. That's going to be a big turning point. On some of these CAFOs, these consecrated agricultural feeding operations, the CAFOs, you might have to permit those under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permitting process to make that. I want to give you 2 examples of hope. One of the sub-champions in the book is from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and they have had the highest density of pulp and paper mills in the United States. So, think of Wisconsin, and so they said it's impossible. We'll never be able to deal with and clean up PCB contaminated sediments. And they went through and did good science, and they did co-production of knowledge, co-innovation of solutions, and they have spent $1.1 billion in Green Bay, Wisconsin on that, with responsible industries paying their fair share, some coming from the Great Lakes Legacy Act and the Federal Act program. Nobody thought that was possible, yet they did. So that gives hope that we can do something else. In Southeast Michigan, on the Detroit River, there's an urban river called the Rouge River that comes in there. There was 168 combined sewer overflow points. It has 23% impervious surface. We wanted less than 10. Raw sewage was overwhelming the river. There was no dissolved oxygen in the river, and it was off-gassing hydrogen sulfide, which gets produced when there's no oxygen. So it was just the smell of rotten eggs. It was just so nobody thought they could do something. And here they've spent $1.1 billion on combined sewer overflow since 1985 and urban stormwater runoff. And they are the first watershed in the United States to have a federal permit, a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit for stormwater. All 48 communities in the watershed. Nobody thought that was possible. I know that the problems of the Maumee are very significant. I know how big the watershed is, and it goes up into Michigan and Indiana, and it's a huge problem. But doing this co-production of knowledge, co-innovation of solutions, and having the will of the people pushing that can make a difference, I think, in my opinion. So thank you for that question. Another question?
Just an offer, a free one. Every year, the Lotus Garden of Monroe puts on a Lotus tour of the western shore of Lake Erie. And we go to places that you can only go that one day. And besides that, Detroit Edison gives you a free lunch. So if you want to go, you have to call me. They have our phone number here. The name is Mika. And it's a half-a-day driving tour. We put as many people in as few cars as we can and run up and down Lake Erie. And please don't get lost. I've had to go look for one or two. But it's really amazing, and you can see just what John has been talking about, how the lakeshore has cleaned up and how the Lotus is like a symbol for this happening. We went to Lansing, our garden club did some years ago, and we weren't getting very far with getting this declared a symbol for Lake Erie. So we finally managed, I'll have to tell you about that skullduggery sometime quietly, to get through to the state legislature, and it worked. So you're welcome to come, it's free. Thank you.
So for-
I go for years. Where would I sign up?
Pardon?
Where do I sign up?
Well, we'll give you our phone. It's Mika in Monroe. It's in the phone book. 734-2421.
So
We will send a follow-up email.
You're right with you.
And anybody that has interest can always reach out to the museum. And
Yeah, for those of you online, if you're interested in a tour of the American Lotus in Monroe, Michigan, the Micas have offered to do that, and they're going to share that information afterwards. Let's go on. Let's go to the back here and then to you next. Hi, Fred.
You touch on actually offering people the accomplishments through the area of concern program itself and how some of these have gone so far in advance with other people. And this is a Great Lakes problem, not just local, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. There were 43 areas of concern, and 9 of them are off the list. You can argue that that's not all that many, a little less than a quarter, but they identify these beneficial use impairments, and 40% of them are no longer a use impairment. There is no longer, say, restrictions on swimming or restrictions on dredging activities or some of those things. So your point is that progress is being made, and we are so fortunate to have these federal investments through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the Great Lakes Legacy Act. You can imagine on sticky issues like contaminated sediment. Before they started this area of concern program, the only way you could remove sediments was navigational dredging of shipping channels to keep them open for the freighters to come in. But now there are programs to do that, and the federal government provides an incentive, 65% of the cost. So they want the industries and local people to have some skin in the game. So you have to come up with 35% non-federal match. It's making a huge difference throughout the Great Lakes in all these areas, because this is legacy pollution that's been around for an awfully long time. So thanks for that question. Yes, your turn.
So the sediment containment area, a lot of heavy metals coming up with those sediments.
Mhm.
When they first started doing that, there was a lot of bird disease and bird deaths going on.
Mhm.
What did they do to address those issues with the sediment containment area?
So the question was, there are these confined disposal facilities, and there were a lot of heavy metals in this initially, and there were some impacts being seen in birds that were using these confined disposal facilities as they are being filled. So what they're doing is trying to break these confined disposal facilities up into cells, little pieces. They'll fill one cell and they'll cap it. They'll go on to the next one, fill it, and cap it. So you sort of work sequentially in doing that. In some cases, these contaminated sediments are going into upland containment cells. If an industry, contributed to the problem, some of these upland containment cells out of the water are on industrial property, and they maintain liability for that on their property as well. In some cases, they are taking these dredged sediments and putting them into big geotubes, these massive, like rubberized plastic tubes, which dewater the sediment. It decreases the volume that has to be disposed of, so that not as much have to go into that, and then they treat the water and it's fine from there. But it's a real sticky problem, and it's been a problem. There have been even some cases throughout the Great Lakes where freighters cannot come in because of contaminants in the sediments, right? Because they would, so they could only have a 50% load or a 40% load or a 60% load because it was the sediment was contaminated. So they're systematically going through this, and Canada is doing the same thing, and they just announced a big pot of money on the Canadian side for this as well. The other thing I'll add to that is that, another problem was habitat. And we used to like to say habitat has no home. There was no management home for it. Everyone say, well, private property owners, they have a responsibility for habitat. Local cities do, counties do, state governments, provincial governments, federal governments, private conservancies have it. Everyone, but they were all pointing at each other. So reaching agreement on the problems, like how much habitat have you lost and how much do you want to restore and to what state? So it's not going back to pristine conditions, but what would you like to do? And how do you go about doing it? And then the federal government can pay 65% of the cost of that. So this is getting some real long-term problems addressed through this. We're, again, only 9 of 43 are off the list, but progress is being made.
John, there was a question about harmful algae blooms on Lake Erie. State of Ohio is trying to create wetlands to stop that all along Route 2. So if you want to see a good project, go down to Howard Marsh and Curtis and take a look at that. The Toledo Metro Parks, the DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service all got together and they created a beautiful marsh up there. 500 acres worth, I think.
Yeah. So Dick just, for those online, he just said that, you know, there's some good examples locally here of creating wetlands that can slow that movement of water down, use natural wetlands to remove some of the phosphorus and bind it up. Yes?
Could you speak a little bit about what Canada is doing differently than the United States to deal with some of these really intractable problems?
You can imagine on some issues, the United States is doing a little better. We have massive funding, billions of dollars through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the Great Lakes Legacy Act. But in some areas, some of the science, they have been ahead of us a little bit in some of the science, their commitment to science. And they have the Canada Centre for Inland Waters in Burlington, Ontario. And they have, their scientists have been leading the charge on some of this contaminated sediment remediation. Like, how do you figure out how contaminated it is and how far up into the watershed and what's the severity and geographic extent of the problem? What are the tools for doing that? And then how do you co-innovate the solutions with that? So Canada's also been ahead of us in reconnecting people to these waterways. If you, they started, he was the mayor of Toronto at one time. His name was David Crombie, and he became a member of parliament and he started the Crombie Commission. And the Crombie Commission wanted to start out with a golden horseshoe, it was called, of trails to reconnect people to Lake Ontario and Toronto Harbor. It would go all the way from the eastern end of Toronto all the way down to Niagara Falls. And they did that. That was so successful. And the benefits from that were so incredible, including rehabilitating habitat and cleaning up brownfields, that they extended it. So now it now goes from the Ontario-Quebec border up the St. Lawrence River, across the north shores of Lakes Ontario and Lakes Erie, up around Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, and across Lake Superior. It's called the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail. It is an amazing, and again, it's helping reconnect people to get them to care about these resources and all the benefits that come with that. So, you know, clearly we've been leaders on certain things and they have as well. But the beauty is these two countries working together. You know, where throughout the world can you find countries working like this together and on a shared resource to this level? So a lot of other places in the world are jealous of what we have here. So I hope that answered your question.
You go ahead and then I think we're gonna wrap up.
We had some fun trying to get kids interested in your environmental issues that Dr. Hartig has so beautifully referred to. And we found them using things. When Dick was at ROTC, he said they used to march to this: be kind to your web-footed friends. A duck might be somebody's mother. Kids get that.
Thank you for coming out tonight, and thanks for caring about the Maumee River and Western Lake Erie. And it's going to take all of us to solve these problems. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you everybody so much for joining us tonight. If you want to rewatch the program, it'll be available on Zoom in a few days after we get everything sort of processed and Dominic cuts out any of my mistakes in post-production. I do want to say we have copies of the book available in the store if you would like to purchase copies, and hopefully John would sign that for you before you go tonight. And then for anybody on Zoom, if you go to our online store, which is nmglstore.org, it's on the homepage that you can purchase it online as well. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great night.